Monasteries burned, coastlines abandoned. Entire kingdoms restructured their defenses around a single terrifying possibility that the ships would come again. For over 2 centuries, the Viking Age reshaped the map of the medieval world in ways that historians are still untangling today. We tend to explain this through violence, through the image of horned helmets, wild eyes, and savage men who lived only to destroy. But that explanation, as satisfying as it feels, leaves out something far more significant. Because the people who struck such deep fear into Europe were not simply warriors. They were something far more complex, far more calculated, and frankly, far more interesting. What really made the Vikings unstoppable is a story that begins not on a battlefield, but on the water. The word Viking is itself a kind of myth. In Old Norse, the term Vikinger most likely referred to a person who went on a sea voyage. A raider, yes, but also a traveler, a seeker of fortune. It was not a nationality. It was not an ethnicity. It was closer to a profession, or perhaps a season of life. The vast majority of the people we call Vikings today spent most of their existence doing something far less traumatic than raiding monasteries. They farmed, they raised livestock, they built homes, raised children, traded goods with their neighbors, and maintained remarkably sophisticated social structures that most people never hear about. The raiding, for many, was something you did when the harvest was thin, when land was scarce, or when a young man needed to prove himself worthy of a place in the world. Scandinavia in the late 8th century was a world of dense forests, long winters, and limited arable land. Norway, Sweden, and Denmark each produced distinct cultures, distinct dialects, and distinct ambitions, but they shared a common pressure. Population was growing. Farmable land was not. The fjords and coastlines of Norway, in particular, created communities that were almost entirely dependent on the sea, not just for food, for movement, for connection, for survival. The sea was not an obstacle to these people. It was a highway. And once you understand that, the entire story of the Viking Age begins to shift into focus. Their society was more nuanced than popular culture gives them credit for. Norse communities were organized around the concept of the thing, an assembly where free men gathered to settle disputes, make laws, and decide collective matters. This was not a barbaric free-for-all. It was an early form of democratic governance, practiced centuries before similar ideas took root elsewhere in Europe. Women in Norse society held a degree of legal standing that was, by medieval standards, genuinely remarkable. They could own property, initiate divorce, and manage estates in their husband's absence, which, given how often the men were away at sea, was no small matter. To put it plainly, Viking society was way more structured than Hollywood ever bothered to show us. Religion wove itself through every layer of daily life. The Norse pantheon, Odin, Thor, Freya, Loki, was not merely a collection of colorful stories. It was a cosmological framework that explained war, death, fate, fertility, and the nature of the universe. Odin, the All-Father, was the god of wisdom in war, but also of poetry and death. He was a seeker of knowledge who sacrificed his own eye for understanding, a deity who embodied the Viking ideal that wisdom and violence were not opposites, but companions. Thor, with his hammer Mjolnir, was the protector of mankind, the god of thunder and honest labor. These beliefs shaped how Vikings fought, how they buried their dead, how they treated guests, and how they understood their own place in the cosmos. It is also worth noting that the Viking Age did not emerge from nowhere. The raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 AD is traditionally cited as the moment the Viking Age began, the moment Europe looked up and realized something had changed. But the conditions that made that raid possible had been building for generations. The longships had been under development for decades. The navigation knowledge had been accumulating through countless shorter voyages. The social pressures pushing young men outward had been mounting quietly, steadily, like water behind a dam. Lindisfarne was not the beginning. It was simply the moment the rest of the world noticed. And what they noticed, above everything else, was the ships. If the Viking Age had a single secret weapon, it was not the axe. It was not the shield wall. It was not even the fearlessness of the men who fought beneath the raven banners. It was a boat. Specifically, it was a revolution in boat design, so elegant, so precisely engineered for its purpose, that it gave the Norse people a capability no other civilization in the medieval world could match. The longship was not just a vessel, it was a statement of intent, a machine built for speed, surprise, and reach, capable of appearing where no enemy expected a fleet to be and vanishing before a defense could be mounted. To understand the Viking Age, you must first understand what made that ship extraordinary. The construction method was called clinker building or lapstrake construction. Planks of oak were overlapped along their edges and riveted together, creating a hull that was both flexible and extraordinarily strong. This flexibility was not a flaw, it was a deliberate engineering choice. A rigid hull in open ocean conditions will eventually crack under the stress of rolling waves. A flexible hull moves with the water, absorbing force rather than resisting it. Norse shipbuilders understood this principle centuries before modern naval engineers gave it a formal name. The keel, a single continuous spine running the full length of the ship, provided structural integrity while keeping the draft remarkably shallow. Some longships drew less than a meter of water. That single fact changed everything. A shallow draft meant the longship could do something no other ocean-going vessel of its era could do. It could sail directly onto a beach. There was no need for a harbor, no need for a dock, no need for the elaborate port infrastructure that other maritime nations depended on. A Viking crew could row their ship straight up onto a riverbank, leap out, conduct a raid, push the ship back into the water, and be gone before a meaningful response could be organized. The same vessel that crossed the open North Atlantic could navigate upriver into the heart of a continent. The longship was, in the truest sense, the world's first truly versatile warship, and the people who built it were, no question about it, the most capable maritime engineers of their age. But the ship alone was not enough. You also had to know where you were going. Viking navigation is one of the most genuinely impressive achievements of the medieval period, and it is one that receives far too little attention. These sailors crossed the North Atlantic, one of the most hostile stretches of ocean on the planet, without magnetic compasses, without sextants, without charts in any modern sense of the word. What they had instead was a deep, accumulated, generational knowledge of the natural world that functioned as a sophisticated navigation system in its own right. They read the ocean itself, the color of the water, the temperature, the direction and character of swells. Even the quality of sediment pulled up from the seabed told an experienced navigator something meaningful about location. They also used the sky with extraordinary precision. On clear nights, the stars provided reliable directional information. During the day, the sun's arc told them latitude. But the North Atlantic is rarely clear, and Norse sailors developed tools to work in overcast conditions that modern researchers are still studying. The most debated of these is the so-called sunstone, a crystal, likely calcite or Iceland spar, that can detect the polarization of light filtering through cloud cover, effectively locating the sun's position even when it is invisible to the naked eye. References to sunstones appear in Norse sagas, and laboratory testing has confirmed that such crystals do function as described. Whether Viking sailors used them systematically remains an open question, but the possibility alone is remarkable. There was also the sun compass, a wooden disc with a central gnome that casts a shadow, allowing sailors to track the sun's position relative to a carved bearing line. A fragment of what appears to be such a device was recovered from a Norse site in Greenland, and reconstructions have demonstrated its practical accuracy. Combined with a technique called latitude sailing, maintaining a consistent position relative to the sun's midday height and simply holding that line across the ocean, Norse navigators could make transatlantic crossings with a reliability that, given their tools, borders on the astonishing. The longship itself came in several variants, each designed for a specific purpose. The Drakkar, or dragon ship, was the iconic warship, long, narrow, built for speed and shock. The Knarr was a broader, deeper-hulled cargo vessel, designed to carry trade goods, livestock, and colonists across open ocean. It was the Knarr, not the Drakkar, that carried the settlers who founded the Norse colonies of Iceland and Greenland, and it was the Knarr that Leif Erikson most likely sailed when he reached the coast of North America. The Norse understood that different missions required different tools, and they built accordingly. By the height of the Viking Age, Norse shipbuilding had produced vessels capable of voyages that would have seemed impossible to contemporary observers elsewhere in the world. They reached Iceland, Greenland, and the coast of North America to the west. They navigated the rivers of Eastern Europe deep into the Russian interior, reaching the Black Sea and the Caspian. They sailed the Mediterranean, traded with Byzantine Constantinople, and made contact with the Islamic Caliphate. All of this was made possible by a tradition of maritime engineering and navigational knowledge that was, in the 9th and 10th centuries, without parallel anywhere on Earth. The longship was the key that opened the medieval world, and the Norse people had spent generations crafting it to perfection. There is a particular image that has lodged itself permanently in the popular imagination when it comes to Viking warriors. Wild eyes, foaming mouth, a man stripped of reason, impervious to pain, charging into battle with an almost inhuman ferocity that no shield wall could contain. The berserker. The word itself has survived intact into modern English. We still say someone has gone berserk when they've lost control entirely. But like so much of what we think we know about the Vikings, the popular image of the berserker is a tangle of mythology, misinterpretation, and genuine historical mystery that deserves to be carefully unpicked. The primary sources for berserker behavior are the Norse sagas, long narrative texts composed mostly in Iceland between the 12th and 14th centuries, describing events that occurred centuries earlier. These sagas describe warriors called berserkers who fought with extraordinary ferocity, seemed immune to wounds, and entered a state of battle rage that set them apart from ordinary soldiers. The word itself is debated. Some scholars derive it from bear shirt, bear meaning bear, serk meaning shirt or coat, suggesting warriors who wore bear pelts into battle as both armor and ritual identity. Others argue for bear shirt, meaning warriors who fought without armor, relying on speed and ferocity rather than protection. Both interpretations point towards something real, a class of elite, ritually distinct warriors who occupied a specific and deliberate role in Norse military culture. What is clear is that the berserkers were not simply angry men. They were specialists, References in the sagas suggest that berserker behavior was cultivated, trained, and in some sense performed, that the transition into battle rage was a deliberate psychological and possibly physiological process, not a spontaneous loss of control. Some modern researchers have proposed that certain plant substances may have been involved. Henbane, a psychoactive plant native to Scandinavia and Northern Europe, produces symptoms that align remarkably well with saga descriptions of berserker behavior: elevated aggression, reduced pain sensitivity, muscular tremors, and a dissociative state that could be interpreted as supernatural possession. Fly agora mushrooms have also been proposed, though the evidence for their ritual use in this context remains thin. The pharmacological theory is compelling, but it is worth noting that it remains exactly that, a theory. There is a parallel argument, and in many ways a more persuasive one, that berserker states were achieved through purely psychological means. Extreme physical conditioning, deliberate sleep deprivation, rhythmic drumming, chanting, and the psychological pressure of ritual preparation can, in combination, produce altered states of consciousness that reduce pain perception and amplify aggression. Modern combat psychology has documented similar phenomena in soldiers under extreme stress: a narrowing of conscious awareness, a suppression of the body's normal pain response, a tunnel vision that focuses entirely on the immediate physical task. The berserkers may have been, in essence, practitioners of a sophisticated, if brutal, form of psychological self-conditioning that produced genuinely extraordinary battlefield performance. What is equally important, and what popular culture almost entirely ignores, is that berserkers occupied an ambiguous social position in Norse society. They were valued as warriors, yes, but they were also feared and distrusted as peacetime members of a community. Several Norse law codes explicitly address the problem of berserkers causing harm outside of battle, and at least one, the Gregos, the medieval Icelandic law code, imposed penalties on men who entered berserker states in civilian contexts. A man who was useful in a shield wall could be a genuine menace at a feast. The Norse understood this tension clearly. The berserker was a weapon, and like all weapons, he needed to be pointed in the right direction. The bear symbolism deserves particular attention. In Norse cosmology, the bear held a specific and powerful ritual significance. It was an animal associated with Odin, with transformation, with the boundary between the human and the wild, with a kind of sacred ferocity that existed outside the normal moral order. Warriors who identified with the bear were not simply choosing an intimidating mascot. They were aligning themselves with a specific set of mythological meanings, claiming access to a power that was understood to be both divine and dangerous. The wolf held a parallel significance, associated with the warriors known as Ulfhegnar, wolfcoats, who appear alongside berserkers in several saga accounts, and may have represented a related but distinct tradition of elite warrior identity. The reality of what happened on a Viking battlefield was already terrifying enough without embellishment. Norse armies were disciplined, tactically sophisticated, and experienced. The shield wall, a tight formation of overlapping shields presenting a near impenetrable barrier to enemy attack, was the standard tactical unit, and breaking an enemy shield wall required both physical courage and coordinated technique. Berserkers, in this context, may have functioned as shock troops, men deployed specifically to break enemy formations through sudden, overwhelming aggression before the main shield walls engaged. If that is what they were, then the mythology surrounding them was itself a tactical asset. An enemy who believed he was about to face men who felt no pain and could not be killed was already at a psychological disadvantage before the first blow landed. The honest answer to the question of what berserkers really were is that we do not know with certainty. The sources are too late, too literary, and too saturated with mythological thinking to be treated as straightforward historical testimony. What we can say is that the berserker tradition points towards something genuine, an elite class of warriors who were deliberately set apart, ritually prepared, and psychologically or pharmacologically altered in ways that produced battlefield behavior remarkable enough to be recorded, remembered, and eventually mythologized across centuries. Whether the foam at the mouth was real or metaphorical, whether the bear skin was literal armor or symbolic identity, the effect on the enemies who faced them was, by all accounts, very much real. And that, in the end, may be all that mattered. Here is the part of the Viking story that almost never makes it into the movies. While the raids on coastal monasteries were real, while the berserkers were charging across frozen battlefields, while longships were terrorizing the shores of England and Francia, another group of Norse men and women were doing something quietly extraordinary. They were building one of the most extensive trade networks the medieval world had ever seen, not through conquests alone, but through commerce, diplomacy, and a relentless geographic curiosity that carried them from the frozen coastlines of Scandinavia to the sun-drenched markets of Baghdad. The Viking as merchant is a figure that history has largely overlooked, and that is a genuine shame, because this side of the story changes everything. The Norse trade network operated along two primary axes. The first was westward and northward, the Atlantic routes that connected Scandinavia to Britain, Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, and eventually North America. The second, and in many ways the more remarkable, was eastward, deep into the river systems of Eastern Europe, through what is now Russia, Ukraine, and the territories of the former Soviet Union, all the way to the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, and the civilizations that lay beyond them. These eastern routes are known collectively as the Varangian routes, named for the Norse traders and warriors whom the Slavic peoples called Varangians, a term that carried connotations of both commerce and armed escort, which tells you something important about the nature of the enterprise. The rivers of Eastern Europe, the Volga, the Dnieper, the Don, were the highways of this eastern network. Norse traders navigated them southward from the Baltic coast, portaging their shallow-drafted vessels overland between river systems when necessary, carrying goods that the wider medieval world desperately wanted. Furs from the northern forests, amber from the Baltic coast, walrus ivory from the Arctic, honey and wax, and with a moral complexity that the Viking Age cannot escape, enslaved people, men, women, and children, captured in raids on British, Irish, Frankish, and Slavic communities, and sold into the labor markets of the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. The slave trade was a significant economic engine of the Viking Age, and any honest account of Norse commercial activity must reckon with it directly. In exchange for these goods, Norse traders brought back silver, enormous quantities of silver. Archaeological excavations across Scandinavia have uncovered hoards of Islamic dirhams, silver coins minted in the Abbasid Caliphate, in quantities that speak to a trade relationship of remarkable scale and duration. More than 80,000 Islamic coins have been recovered from Scandinavian soil, a number that represents only a fraction of what originally circulated. The Norse did not merely encounter the Islamic world at the edges, they penetrated it, trading directly with merchants from Baghdad, Samarkand, and the broader Abbasid commercial network. An Arab diplomat and traveler named Ahmed ibn Fadlan encountered a group of Norse traders, whom he called the Rus, on the Volga River in 922 AD, and left behind one of the most vivid and detailed eyewitness accounts of Viking culture that history has preserved. His description of a Norse ship burial is detailed, unsettling, and completely irreplaceable as a primary source. The Varangian presence in Eastern Europe did not remain purely commercial for long. Norse settlers established fortified trading posts along the river routes, and these posts gradually evolved into the foundational cities of what would become the Russian and Ukrainian states. Novgorod, Kiev, modern Kyiv, and other early Slavic urban centers have significant Norse fingerprints in their founding histories. The Rus, as the Norse settlers in this region came to be known, eventually merged with local Slavic populations, adopted local languages and customs, and became the ruling class of a new civilization. The very name Russia almost certainly derives from this Norse presence, though the precise etymology remains a subject of scholarly debate. What is not debatable is that the Norse eastward expansion left a political and cultural imprint on Eastern Europe that lasted for centuries. To the south, the Varangian roots connected to Byzantium, Constantinople, the wealthiest and most sophisticated city in the medieval world. The Byzantine Empire maintained a core of elite mercenary soldiers known as the Varangian Guard, recruited primarily from Norse and later Anglo-Saxon warriors who served as the personal bodyguard of the Byzantine emperor. This was not a minor posting. The Varangian Guard was one of the most prestigious military units in the medieval world, and service in it was actively sought by Norse warriors of ambition and ability. Harald Hardrada, who would later become King of Norway and die famously at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066, just weeks before the Norman conquest of England, served in the Varangian Guard as a young man. The connections between the Norse world and Byzantium were deep, durable, and genuinely consequential for the history of both civilizations. Back in Western Europe, Norse commercial activity was no less significant. The town of Hedeby, on the southern Jutland Peninsula in what is now northern Germany, was one of the largest trading centers in early medieval Europe, a cosmopolitan marketplace where Norse, Frankish, Slavic, and Anglo-Saxon merchants exchanged goods in a remarkably sophisticated economic environment. Similar centers existed at Birka in Sweden and Kaupang in Norway. These were not rough frontier camps. They were planned urban settlements with established market regulations, craft production quarters, and international commercial connections that would not look out of place in a broader history of medieval urbanism. What emerges from all of this is a picture of the Norse world that is almost the opposite of the one-dimensional raiders of popular imagination. The same cultural energy that produced the berserker and the longship raid also produced the merchant who navigated 4,000 miles of river to trade in Baghdad, the diplomat who negotiated commercial treaties with Byzantine emperors, and the urban planner who laid out market towns on the shores of the Baltic. The Vikings were, above everything else, a people of extraordinary range, geographically, economically, and culturally, and the trade networks they built quietly and persistently across 2 centuries of relentless geographic ambition shaped the medieval world in ways that the raids, dramatic as they were, simply cannot match. That is the part of the Viking story that deserves far more attention than it gets, and honestly, it is the part that hits different once you actually sit with the full scale of it. There is a particular kind of courage that does not announce itself with war cries or the clash of weapons. It is quieter than that, and in many ways more demanding. It is the courage required to load everything you own onto a wooden ship, push off from a coastline you know, and sail into open ocean toward a land you have only heard described secondhand, with no certainty of what you will find and no guarantee of return. This is the courage that settled Iceland, And it is the same courage, carried further and further west across centuries, that eventually placed Norse boots on the soil of a continent the rest of the world would not reach for another 500 years. Iceland was first settled by Norse colonists in the late 9th century, around 874 AD, according to the Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, an Icelandic manuscript that records the names and origins of the first settlers with a specificity that suggests a genuine oral tradition preserving real historical memory. The settlers came primarily from Norway, with a significant contingent from Norse Gaelic communities in Ireland and Scotland, people of mixed Norse and Celtic heritage who brought with them a cultural synthesis that would shape Icelandic civilization in distinctive ways. They came because land in Norway was running out. They came because political pressures, particularly the consolidating power of Harald Fairhair's Norwegian kingdom, made independence increasingly difficult at home. And they came because the sea, as it always had for these people, offered an alternative. What they found in Iceland was not welcoming in any conventional sense. The landscape was volcanic, stark, and brutally cold for much of the year. There were no indigenous human inhabitants, only an island of geysers, lava fields, glacier-fed rivers, and Arctic winds that tested the limits of human endurance. And yet, within a generation, the Norse settlers had built a functioning society from nothing. They cleared land, established farms, developed a pastoral economy based on sheep and cattle, and created political institutions that were, by any measure, remarkable. The Althing, established around 930 AD, was a national assembly that convened annually at Thingvellir, a dramatic rift valley created by the boundary between the North American and Eurasian tectonic plates. It is considered one of the oldest functioning parliaments in human history. In the middle of the North Atlantic, on a volcanic island at the edge of the habitable world, the Norse created a democratic republic. The story does not stop in Iceland. Eric the Red, a man whose biography reads like a saga archetype, was exiled from Iceland around 982 AD, following a series of violent disputes. With nowhere else to go, he sailed further west into waters that Norse sailors had reportedly glimpsed before, and found a massive island of ice and rock that he named, with what can only be described as the world's first exercise in real estate marketing, Greenland. The name was deliberate. A green-sounding name, Eric reportedly reasoned, would attract settlers. And it worked. He returned to Iceland, gathered a fleet of 25 ships, and led a colonization expedition that established 2 permanent Norse settlements on Greenland's western coast, communities that would survive remarkably for nearly 500 years. It was from Greenland that the most audacious chapter of Norse exploration began. Around 1000 AD, Leif Erikson, Eric the Red's son, sailed further west from Greenland based on reports from a Norse sailor named Bjarni Herjolfsson, who had reportedly sighted an unknown coastline years earlier but had not landed. Leif went to look. What he found, the sagas call Vineland, wineland or meadowland depending on the translation, a place of wild grapes, tall timber, and a climate far milder than anything the Greenland settlers had experienced. The sagas describe multiple subsequent voyages, settlement attempts, and eventual conflict with the indigenous peoples the Norse called Skrælings, a term whose precise meaning is debated, but whose tone is clearly dismissive, which tells us something important about the nature of the encounter. For centuries, Vineland was treated by many historians as mythology, a saga embellishment, a too-good-to-be-true story of Norse priority in the Americas. Then, in 1960, Helge Ingstad and his archaeologist wife Anne Stein Ingstad discovered the site of L'Anse aux Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland, Canada. Excavations revealed the unmistakable remains of a Norse settlement, turf longhouses, iron working debris, a spindle whorl indicating the presence of women, and artifacts consistent with Norse material culture from around 1000 AD. The site has since been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it has settled the historical question definitively. The Norse reached North America 5 centuries before Columbus. They built structures there, they worked iron there, and then they left. Why they left is a question the sources answer only partially. The saga suggests that conflict with indigenous populations made sustained settlement impossible, that the Norse, who could push their way into uninhabited Iceland and sparsely populated Greenland, found in North America a continent that was not empty, inhabited by people who were not prepared to accommodate the newcomers on Norse terms. The distances involved also made support and resupply from Greenland extremely difficult. A settlement at the edge of a continent, thousands of miles from any Norse community capable of sending meaningful reinforcement, was simply too vulnerable to sustain. The Norse reached North America, recognized its potential, and concluded, correctly as it turned out, that they did not yet have the numbers or the logistical capacity to hold it. The Greenland settlements themselves tell a melancholy final chapter to the Norse westward expansion. They survived for roughly 500 years, maintaining fragile communities that traded with Europe, hunted walrus and polar bear, and adapted as best as they could to one of the most unforgiving environments human beings have ever chosen to inhabit. And then, in the early 15th century, they disappeared. Climate change, the onset of the Little Ice Age, made agriculture increasingly impossible. Trade with Europe became sporadic and then ceased. The Inuit people, better adapted to Arctic conditions than the Norse, expanded into territories the struggling settlements depended on. By around 1408, the last written record of the Greenland Norse appears in European documents. After that, silence. The western frontier of the Norse world, which had reached all the way to the coast of a continent, contracted back across the ocean and disappeared into history. The Viking Age is traditionally said to have ended in 1066, the year Harald Hardrada fell at Stamford Bridge and William the Conqueror crossed the Channel at Hastings. It is a tidy historical boundary, as such boundaries always are, and like most tidy historical boundaries, it obscures more than it reveals. The Norse world did not simply switch off, it transformed, it merged. It was absorbed into the broader current of European civilization while leaving behind an imprint so deep and so pervasive that we move through it every single day without recognizing it. The days of the week carry Norse fingerprints in plain sight. Tuesday is Tyr's Day. Wednesday is Odin's Day, Woden in the Old English form. Thursday is Thor's Day. Friday is Frigg's Day. 4 of the 7 days we name our weeks with are named for Norse gods, a fact so normalized that it has become invisible. The English language itself carries hundreds of words of Norse origin: sky, window, knife, husband, ugly, awkward, ransack. The last of which is a Norse compound meaning, appropriately enough, to search a house. The legal concept of a jury, foundational to the Anglo-American legal tradition, has roots in the Norse assembly tradition, brought to England by Scandinavian settlers in the Danelaw. Genetically, the Norse presence in the British Isles, Ireland, Iceland, and the coastal regions of Europe remains measurable in modern populations. Studies of ancient and contemporary DNA have traced Norse ancestry into communities from Dublin to Kiev, from northern France to the Canadian coastline. These people did not simply raid and disappear. They settled, they intermarried, and they became part of the fabric of every society they touched. What the Vikings ultimately left behind was not destruction, it was connectivity. In a medieval world of fragmented kingdoms, isolated communities, and limited horizons, the Norse people built networks of trade, of settlement, of cultural exchange that tied the medieval world together in ways that shaped the civilizations that followed. They were farmers who became sailors, sailors who became raiders, raiders who became merchants, merchants who became founders of nations. The full truth of who they were is so much richer, so much stranger, and so much more remarkable than the myth. And if this story has made you see them differently, that is exactly the point. If you want to go deeper into the ancient world's most compelling civilizations, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. There is a great deal more history where this came from.